All right, so this video is going to be about homeostasis. And homeostasis is a term that really is going to be kind of in the background of every lesson that we learn about in anatomy and physiology. Because essentially, in order for our cells to work properly, they have to kind of remain in certain conditions. And there are many different conditions that have to be regulated in our bodies in order for our cells to work properly. Some examples are things like pH, our body temperature, our heart rate, our blood pressure, our water balance. And so what homeostasis is if we just kind of break the word down, the first part, homeo, which is similar to the prefix homo, and it simply means the same. And then stasis refers to staying in equilibrium. So I just kind of like to think of this word as literally meaning staying the same. And so homeostasis is maintaining kind of constant, balanced internal conditions inside of a living thing. And so even though the outside is constantly changing, as you walk from one place to another, you enter a room, you go outside, immediately your environment changes, the temperature changes. If you get scared, all of those things are going to affect your body, and it's important that our body stays within a certain range. And so we kind of call that our set point. And so in order for our cells to function properly, they must stay within a normal range. And that's what homeostasis is all about. It's trying to maintain steady internal conditions even though the outside around us is changing. And so first question here, which of the following is the definition of homeostasis? So once again, it pretty much means staying the same. So as you read through your answer choices, the best answer is maintaining a relatively constant internal environment. And so the way that we do that is primarily through a process called negative feedback. And I want to be clear here in that you've got the terms positive and negative, and in this sense, they do not mean good and bad. It has to do with what's going on in the feedback mechanism. So the key to negative feedback is that it returns conditions to normal. And I kind of like just to kind of summarize it as a turn on and turn off. And I want you to think about negative feedback kind of like an air conditioning thermostat. You set it to a certain temperature. If it goes above that temperature, then the air kicks on. But as soon as you get back to the temperature that you want it to be, it will turn itself off. And same thing if it were to fall below when you have the heater on. And so that's what negative feedback is all about. It tries to keep a condition closer to that set point. So it turns on when it moves away. Once it gets back to the set point, it turns off. And these are the mechanisms that we use to maintain homeostasis. Negative feedback helps us stay within those constant, steady, balanced ranges. Now another type is positive feedback. And positive feedback, once again, this is not about good or bad. Positive has to do with turning on and turning up. It intensifies. And so this really isn't a homeostatic mechanism. In fact, most of the mechanisms in our body are negative feedback. Things like temperature control, water balance, blood glucose levels, heart rate, blood pressure. What positive feedback does is it actually moves us farther away from the set point. And a lot of times that's taking us away from homeostasis. But there's a couple examples that are good, and we'll talk about those here in a moment. So like I said, most of our mechanisms are negative feedback, and there are three parts to negative feedback. You have the sensor, the control center, and the effector. So it starts by essentially sensing the change. So if you get hot, your body's going to sense that your temperature is increasing. The control center is going to kind of process that information. So you're going to kind of sense the stimulus. Then you're going to try to analyze what's going on. And then you're going to do something about it. So the sensor is going to kind of monitor the conditions. The control center is going to analyze and determine what needs to be done. And then the effector is actually going to reverse the situation, actually do something about it to help maintain homeostasis. And so we've got a couple examples here that you'll find in the human body. One is when you do get hot. When your body temperature rises, you've got thermoreceptors that are sensing that change in your skin. The hypothalamus in your brain is going to kind of recognize that we're moving away from that 98.6 degrees. And then the control center, which is in your brain, is going to tell your body what to do. And the effectors are normally going to be glands or muscles, or in this case also we have blood vessels. And so once your brain determines that you're getting warm and probably getting too warm, it's going to tell your sweat glands to secrete sweat and your blood vessels to dilate. Both of those are going to help the body temperature go back down. So once again, it's kind of a turn on. You turn on the sweating and the dilation, and then once we get back to normal, it's going to turn off. Another example in our bodies is blood glucose regulation. And so when you eat, your blood glucose is going to rise. And so you're going to have sensors in your pancreas that recognize the increase in glucose. Once again, we have the control center, and that's going to recognize that we're moving away from those steady conditions. And that's going to trigger the effector, which in this case is going to affect the liver and the muscle cells. And so when the blood glucose goes up, your pancreas kind of gets the message that it needs to release insulin. Once the insulin is released, it's going to trigger glucose to be removed from the blood and into fat and muscle. And it's also going to trigger glucose to be stored in the liver. And so that's going to lead to a decrease in blood glucose. Now, we wouldn't want the glucose levels to just decrease to an abnormal level. And so once they get back to normal, that turns off, and the pancreas is no longer going to release insulin. So once again, we have a turn on, turn off kind of mechanism. All right, so let's kind of quickly match up the three parts. So the sensor is going to sense the changes, so it's going to detect the stimulus. The control center is going to process and, kind of assess the situation. And so that's going to compare the new value to what normal is. And then the effector is actually going to do something, and that's going to cause the change that's going to return it back to normal. All right, now the other type is positive feedback. And once again, this is a turn on and turn up. It's going to intensify the change and take you further away from normal. There are a couple of beneficial examples that you'll find in the human body. One is childbirth and one is blood clotting. So like over here, you have an example for blood clotting. So if you have a tear in the blood vessel, your platelets are going to start to collect. They're going to release chemicals which trigger more platelets to attract and collect, which triggers more platelets to attract and connect. And it's going to increase until you form the plug, you form the clot, and then it will stop. So positive feedback kind of amplifies until you accomplish a task. Now, another example is childbirth. And so as the baby kind of starts to move downward, it can put some pressure on the cervix. That's going to trigger those stretch receptors. That's going to lead the brain to release oxytocin, which is going to trigger contractions. And as most of you are probably familiar with, whether you've gone through childbirth or not, we know that those contractions get bigger and stronger and bigger and stronger and closer together until the baby is born. And so it just kind of keeps on going and keeps on going and keeps on going with an increase in that intensity. Now there can be some negative examples of positive feedback in the body, and one is your heart. So when your blood pressure decreases, it decreases the blood flow. Well, the blood carries oxygen, and so the heart needs that oxygen, and so when you have less, it's going to cause the heart to not work as well. And so that means the blood pressure is going to go even lower, which means even less oxygen is going to be delivered, and so that can actually be deadly. So in this case, positive feedback is taking us once again away from homeostasis, and in this case, it could be very detrimental. All right, so one final question for homeostasis. If you have the negative feedback mechanism, remember that's a turn on or turn off, what does the effector do? So enhances the activity of the original stimulus. That would actually be dealing with positive feedback. It does have an effect. That's why it's called an effector. Negative feedback is usually positive because it's taking us back to homeostasis. So the answer here is that it reverses. And that is all for homeostasis.